Desperate situations call for desperate measures. When the SS Chitral berths at Cape Town docks, Kieron heads for the confessional box and a deed that will get him locked up. Chapter 20. Stowaway. 2 days passed. I had tired of a diet of cold mealy corn and rancid water. I was grimy, tired, and starting to stink like a water rat. 2 more ships berthed. I sauntered along the dock to inspect them. P&O again, but this time it was the SS Chitral, which seemed a good choice. The gangplank was unmanned. I hopped aboard and began my search. I hadn't gone far and remained in the open deck, somewhere near the front. A voice called down to me and I looked up. "Looking for someone?" A man in uniform said gently, almost humorously. I felt as though I'd been caught stealing and for a moment had no reply. "Just looking around," I said. I don't quite know why, but I knew this man was onto something, so I panicked, and he sensed my hesitation. "I need a job. I need to get to England," I stuttered. I cannot recall what was said, but there seemed an endorsement for me to do my deed. So, encouraged, I looked everywhere, inside lifeboats, ventilation ports, and any door that offered promise. As I passed through the main lobby, I had a quick look at the passenger list and picked a name. I was a sneaky, scheming bugger, that's for sure. I noticed a lift nearby, took it to the lowest floor. As I stepped out, I saw a curtained doorway and quickly pushed through the velvet. It was the entrance to a cinema. Behind the screen I found a church altar, and on each end a big wooden pillar, half cut into the wall, reached to the ceiling. To conserve space, the right-hand pillar had a small door that opened into a room with a very convenient red cushion on the floor, a little red curtain on the wall. This was the spot. I rushed back up the lift and through the lobby. A hand grabbed my shoulder. "Are you disembarking?" I had no idea what that meant, and when he asked my name, I thanked my devious mind for selecting one earlier. I repeated it and was set free. I said goodbye to my landlord, the Madala, and was back on board within 10 minutes, grip in hand, down to the cinema-cum-chapel. I squatted on the cushion and prayed. If you've ever stood in a phone booth, you will know that the first sensation you experience is an overwhelming desire to have a pee. My luminous watch glowed 4 in the afternoon. I always thought luminosity was magic, but it's just radioactive salt energized by any old light source. Now you know. I dozed fitfully. Images of a man walking the plank plagued my mind, but I had read in some pirate folklore tome that walking the plank was a tiresome, overly elaborate punishment not often carried out. Maybe I'd be lucky. By 6 in the evening I could feel the ship moving. I was bursting for a pee, but there was nothing I could do about it. I dozed off for a while, then snapped awake to the sound of Omar Sharif's voice. I chanced a peek and eased the door open a fraction. I could see hundreds of faces lit by the reflection of a movie. Dr. Zhivago was playing. My mother once said that Omar Sharif had halitosis, and his leading ladies cringed at the thought of kissing him. How did she know this? My mind began to fantasize. What if the door was mistaken as the entrance to a loo? Don't mention the word. I crossed my legs, huddled back to try and vanish into a thin, almost invisible wisp. The film droned on to be followed by a cartoon, Loopy de Loop, the self-appointed Good Samaritan with a bad French accent. I was dying and people were laughing. The second sitting came and went, and by the time my Timex told me it was after midnight, the theatre had cleared. My bottom had gone to sleep. My bladder screamed and it was dark. In desperation, I stood up and did a war dance to get the circulation going. It made things worse, and finally, I took my chance. I dashed from the door and charged for the lift, up one floor and out. Nobody in sight, and there, halfway along a dimly lit passage, I saw the gents. It was touch and go, but I made it and stood for ages as the relief flooded from me. A quick drink and a wash saw me back in my confessional box within 5 minutes. Had I remembered Saturday had just passed, I may have been prepared for what happened next. What day comes after Saturday? You got it in one. Sunday. Massachusetts. At precisely 5:30 that morning, an overhead light snapped on. For some time I stared at it and distinctly heard someone humming a tune. Discreetly, I parted the curtain to see, not feet from me, a priest donning his garb. He kissed every garment as he placed it upon his holy person. I was quite fascinated and felt privileged to witness the precision in which he prepared himself. Until, that is, he sat opposite me. 6 inches from me, a thin wall between us, and only then did it dawn on me I was in a confessional box. Bless me, Father, for I have sinned. Should I confess? Why not? Words exchanged in a confessional are supposed to be sacrosanct. It would be perfect. Alas, my lips remained sealed. Passengers started filling the chapel. One fart and the game was surely up. My cheeks remained sealed. The priest gave up waiting for sinners to confess. Mass began. 2 sessions, one for the Catholics, one for the rest. The priest changed his garb. The light went out, and all was quiet once again. I must have aged 10 years, but it was time to implement Plan C. I imagined being discovered by a sympathetic passenger, a beautiful rich one that had me chained to a bedpost. In exchange for food, I would give her favors, and we would have clandestine dinners in the moonlight. What an incentive! I eased the door open and looked at the empty seats. Open a bit more, and still nobody in sight. I pressed on, the door as far open as it would go. Not a human anywhere to be seen. I waltzed out. "May I help you?" came an American accent. I froze in mid-stride and turned around. He was sitting on the corner chair, the row I hadn't been able to see. I faced the priest and stared at him. "Are you a passenger?" He frowned. "Actually," I said, I haven't paid my fare." The words rushed from my mouth before I could arrest them. "You mean you're a stowaway?" he said, nonplussed, almost disgusted, as though I was a poisonous toad that had dropped from the heavens during a rainstorm. "Well, yes, I suppose I am," I said lamely, expecting a shaft of lightning to cut me down. "Gee!" He gripped my hand enthusiastically. "I've never met a stowaway." I have to admit, it never dawned on me that celebrity status came so easily. But his expression changed dramatically. "I will have to turn you over to the captain," he said, and beckoned me to follow him up the lift and towards the bridge. "Darn it," he said, shaking his head as I followed. "A stowaway." We stood outside a wooden door. He knocked. A surprised young bellboy greeted us. "The captain, please," he said, shooting me a stern gaze. It seemed that friendly, startled banter was now over. The captain came to the door, wiping his mouth with a starched napkin. He was short and balding, smiley like a little boy. "This is—" The priest looked at me. I stared at them both as they stared at me. "Oh, yes," I said. "Me?" "Is, son. You. What's your name?" I considered saying something like Omar Williams, perhaps. "Dowling, Kieron Dowling." The captain put his hand out to shake mine, and I thought, this is really good. "He's a stowaway." The fatal words came out of that holy mouth like a judgment. The captain's hand dropped in dismay, but before his hand could get away, I had grabbed his finger. He shook it loose and humphed. "Put him in the hands of the chief officer," the captain said, frowning as he shut the door. Just like that. Marched to the bridge, guided through a door to the outside where a fierce wind stung my knackered eyes, I began to feel the impact of my caper. I witnessed young officers discussing me and cowered under their scrutiny. For at least an hour I waited. At last, I was escorted back through the small corridors into another room. The chief officer had his back to me and was sitting at his desk poring over a large volume. I peered over his shoulder and noticed it was some kind of nautical Bible, open on the letter S. He ignored me for a while, then stood up, and I was awed by his size. "Criminal," he seethed. As he stood there, headmaster-like, I thought, this is a job for my cool and calculated brother Mike. But I was not alone with this man in this wooden room. Another man, some kind of carpenter, was fixing a cupboard. He listened and winked at me. Is this a time for backs to the wall? Perhaps, I mused as the chief continued. "Where's your baggage?" "In the confessional." The carpenter burst into laughter, then stifled his mirth as the chief officer sent him from the room. "Stowing away is not as romantic as the days of Mr. Drake. You, Sonny, will go to prison," he huffed. "The confessional, indeed." Chief continued and picked up a phone as I swayed from starvation and shame. He barked a command into the phone and ignored me as he continued to study the manual. The door swung open and a starched bellboy waltzed in. Chief explained to him that my baggage needed collecting, but neither of them knew where the confessional was. "Near the cinema," I offered, and with that Duncan, as I later discovered him to be, sauntered away and eventually came back with my grip. Chief emptied it onto the floor and minutely examined the stinking contents. Gingerly, he took my passport out and soon had a pretty good idea of my background. "An officer's son?" He looked at me with disdain, not expecting a reply. "An officer's son," he repeated as though it were some kind of incurable tropical disease. "Address," he ordered. Pen poised and I rattled off the details. And there my interview ended. I was placed in the hands of a hairy, glass-eyed Italian named Joe, who had a disturbing twitch. He marched me down through the rabbit warren of passages to the back of the ship and bowed humorously as he let me into the isolation ward, a self-contained cabin with 2 bunks and a neat little bathroom. Next door to this I noticed a laundry, which was run by a Chinese crew. I also learned the ship had come from Hong Kong. Fortunately for me, it was a British ship, otherwise I reckon I'd have been rogered to death by now. Adjacent to my room was a holding area for passengers' pets. I could hear them barking and whining. Joe locked me in my cabin and told me to get cleaned up for breakfast. Food at last, and after a good dig-out, I was shown my assigned table and tucked into a hearty meal. So, Joe was to be my protector, and as the other crew members filed into the dining room, I was left alone, the subject of scrutiny and curiosity. And I suspected lust. My situation raced through the ship like wildfire, and I was certainly beginning to think I did indeed have an incurable disease. Back in my cabin, a letter waited for me. It was from Chief. The essence of it all was that I was to be locked up during any port call and free to roam with crew facilities at all other times. I spent days working on the tan and being ogled from the deck above by first-class passengers as I strummed a guitar like some bent Casanova. The SS Chitral powered its way north. Then news from home. Ted had replied to Chief's request for some £200 sterling to cover my fare. Alas, it was not to be. Ted suggested this be a further exercise in character building. I had to suffer the consequences, take my punishment like a man. But, as they say, in every seed of adversity, there is an equal or better good. 2 lovely aging Catholic ladies offered to pay my fare. The news got to me through the grapevine, and I discovered the priest would not condone such generosity. Everyone was bent on building my character, except me. So the days dragged by, and the only relief was a very kind man who asked me to keep an eye on his dogs, brush them, feed and walk them, clean up their shit. Then I discovered he was also trying to build my character. I, too, was starting to look for this elusive trait. Where was it hiding? Perhaps I could buy one with the proceeds from my work behind the crew bar. I don't know, but one day he started asking questions about Ted. Things like what his rank was, what regiment and stuff like that. I honestly believe he thought I was a head case. Well, it paid off because he discovered I was telling the truth and traced Ted's career via some military book. This guy was also an officer, and I began to see how the old boy network functioned. I was invited down to his house in Kent after I'd paid my dues. All this wonderful character-building stuff. So, to Journey's End at King George V Docks, London. I sat, freezing my bollocks off in my cabin. It was snowing, my grip was packed. I had donned my tropical double-breasted suit. Most importantly, I had a tan. I had a British passport. I had a carton of Peter Stuyvesant cigarettes. I had zero character. The ship emptied. I waited. Then the delegation arrived, and I prayed for freedom. Chief waltzed in with the captain and an actual uniformed British police officer. The chief was smiling. That, above all, was scary. My passport was checked. Lots of humming and oohing and shaking of heads. Yes, I thought, I'm doomed, and for the first time, I was right.